Welcome back to this second video, their Learning Max series. I'm going to go File Reset, hit No, and yes, I really want to reset just to get Max back to its basic position and starting point, if you will. And what I want to try to show you now is a couple more things behind creating objects. So we see first off, when we go to create box, by default the creation method is set to box, which means we creating the length and the width with one mouse command, and then when we release we create the height. Notice if we set it to cube, we just drag out a perfect square. We create all three parameters excuse me, at the same time, and they're a perfect correlation to each other. Because just like with spear, we only have the radius that we're going to create, so we can just keep creating these guys. And we can do the same thing with cube if we wanted to. If we just want to quickly throw out some cubes that we can then later come in here and make adjustments to or whatever. Also, and we see that each one of our objects has the same kind of creation methods. Okay, so when we see the edge, we see for tube, for example, we click, we drag out, there's our tube. If we set it from edge, notice that we create and we drag out from the edge around that center point. So it's worth noting that we have those options. Okay, the next thing we see, keyboard entry, we can actually come in here and type and say at 20, and then we hit tab to go to the next one, 20 and 20, for example. We're going to make the box 40 by 40, 54 by 30, and hit create, and there it is, exactly as we typed it in. You see it's 20, 20, 20 down here, and length and height and the width are exactly as we typed it in. So that's good for people that are that want to have that very major type control over their objects. The next thing that I want to bring your attention to, I'm going to go ahead and create us another box here. And let's say I wanted to create a box, another one sitting right on top of this one. Well, if I move my mouse and click and drag, we see that that box is actually over here. And if I want to create one right here on the side, we see that it's over here. But I can check this very wonderful box right here. It says auto grid, and we notice immediately, see if I turn it off, our cursor immediately looks different. We are now getting a gizmo, these axes, the Z, the Y, and the X axis on our cursor. And as I move towards my object, notice the Z axis just flipped, and it flipped again, and it flipped again. It's actually following the surface of this object. So now if I want to make a box on top of this one with my auto grid turned on, I can actually come up here and I can actually drag and create a box exactly on the surface, and it'll just keep doing this on and on and on. And these guys are all completely touching each other right on the surface. So it's a really cool way and a quick way of creating objects on the surface, because without doing this, I'm going to undo, I would have to make another box of random dimensions and then move this onto the surface, and maybe come over here and maybe make this a little bit more the size that I kind of had in mind, and then create another one and move it and rotate it And as you can see, this is not going to be as fun as it is with our auto grid. You can just come right in here and get right to business. So definitely wanted to make sure that you were aware of that. It's a very useful feature, to say the least. I'm going to go ahead and reset again. And I just like to do that every now and then to just make sure things are fresh and clean slate, if you will. Okay, so those are our create standard primitives. Obviously, we can come down here and we can have we can create our extended primitives, and we see that these guys have a little bit more options. Notice they still have the same creation methods and keyboard entries. And the best thing that you can do really is to just go through these guys and take a look-see at what the options are. It's pretty much exactly the same principles as creating our standard primitives. You just click and drag them out, and take a look at what your options are. Different things that we can do to these objects. But what I want to talk about now is if we go to, and I would stay away from a lot of these. I mean, have fun, go through, pick on them, play with them, you know, for the time being, just to see what they do. Like stairs, obviously, are going to create for you stairs. You know enough now that you will be able to go through and play around with all of these. But what I want to talk about now is the next one, which is shapes. And shapes are different than geometry because of the fact we see we have splines. So I'm just going to go ahead and click on rectangle, and we see that that's all that we've created is a rectangle or a circle. These are not 3D in any stretch of the imagination, whereas our box or our sphere obviously is. Okay, so our 2D shapes, or our splines, or lines, however you want to look at them, are the building blocks for our primitives. Obviously, we could take this rectangle and we could create a box from it, and we could take this sphere and we could create a sphere from it, or a circle and make a sphere from it. So they're the building blocks of 3D shapes. So I'm going to go ahead and we'll click on rectangle, and I'm going to go ahead and drag this out again. And again, notice I can switch my creation method to center, and we can just drag out a rectangle like so. Okay, and what I'm going to do now is we're going to explore. So I've created a rectangle. I have created it. I've moved out of creation mode by going to my move tool, and now I want to, and notice that all my options down here were removed. So now in order to access those options, I have to go to my modify tab, and we see here's all of our options again. Notice our rectangle has a corner radius that we can play around with, and if we take it too far, then the math basically starts to move past and flip through itself and all these wonderful things. So I'm just going to set this to like a 10 value or something. Okay, so as it stands right now, we have, a very simple line, a rectangle that has a corner radius and these set dimensions. But I'm going to open up our rendering rollout here and take a look at some of the other things that we can do with it. We'll go ahead and check enable in renderer, which will make this actually viewable to our render. So if I turn it off and hit our render, we see that we have absolutely nothing in our scene, and we'll talk more about this later. If I check it, hit render, we see there it is. It's actually visible to the render. And if I say enable in viewport, basically what that is we're actually seeing now what the renderer sees. So we can tell it to not show it in the actual render, just be or not show in the actual viewport, just be in the render, or vice versa, or both of them together, so we can see exactly what we're going to see in the render. Okay, but what we have done by enabling these options, if we turn these off, again, this is not a 3D object. This is a line. This is a mathematical formula, basically a bunch of vectors and points in space. By turning these on, we've actually turned this line into a 3D object. It has depth and width and perspective, and it's actually visible in the 3D world. And we see I can come over here and increase the thickness of this object. We can play around with the size. I can bring the sides down. And again, right clicking will take it to its lowest possible value. Okay, so it's a really cool way of modeling and just understanding that you have this ability with these lines. Angle, you see, is actually going to rotate this object, and I'm going to give you a quick lesson in animation here. I'm going to come down here and hit Auto key, which we see everything kind of goes red around our viewport, and I'm going to go and scroll this to frame 100, and here in angle I'm going to type in 360, and now turn off Auto key and hit play, and we see that we've now animated our rectangle, the angle of the rectangle, the radial angle, which is kind of cool. And notice that changing the sides doesn't affect, since the only thing that's been animated is the angle, so we can kind of get a different look here. And it's really kind of good to know. It's fun to play with. So anyway, let's go ahead, and that's all of our radial. And I'm going to just select on these keyframes. So I'm making a marquee and right click, delete selected. So we have no keys, and I'll set angle back to 0. And come over here and check rectangular, and notice I can obviously play around with the length settings, all these different settings that we have. Let's go and mess with our corner radius more. Okay, so from just a simple line, we've got a lot of options available to us, and we can rotate the angle of this, have that animated if we wanted to, play around with the aspect ratio. So there's a lot of things to play around with when it comes to these lines. Now what I want to do here is I'm going to go ahead and set it back to radial for a second, and I'm going to delete this rectangle, and I'm going to go back to create shapes, and I'm going to do another rectangle, drag out, and we see that this rectangle is holding the exact same parameters as the last one. And if I go create circle, notice this is holding the same parameters. So basically, anytime you make a settings change, so if I drag another one out, if we make a settings change to any of these, let's say we say don't enable in render and don't enable in viewport, the next time we make rectangles or any shapes, they're going to hold those same parameters. So it's good to know. So now I want to take you down to the next rollout. That's pretty much all for our rendering rollout. And now I want to take you down to the interpolation one. We can see if I right click on steps, we send that back to 0. Basically we just have the points of this shape that are creating the object. That's it. If I add some steps, we're basically adding more vertices, we're adding more resolution, more information to this object. And as we continue to up these steps and the interpolation, we see that this shape is getting smoother and smoother and smoother. And notice that, let's say right here, from this angle, Okay, this sphere looks very smooth. If I come over here and increase the resolution to 100 steps, I notice that the shape really doesn't change at all, and the smoothness doesn't look to be any smoother. It doesn't look to be any more refined than it did when it was down at 20. So what's the difference? The difference being is that going from 20 to 100, 100 being the highest we can make it, we've actually increased the amount of memory max needs to display this object, to hold this object in memory. So I'm going to set this back to 20 real quick, and I'm going to use this as an opportunity to show you another hotkey that you need to be familiar with, and that is F4. If I hit F4, we see that we're actually looking at this object. So that's the shaded wireframe toggle. So if I turn it off, we see this is a shaded object, and now we're seeing shaded wireframe. So if I hit F3, there's our wireframe. So we can actually see through this object. We see in wireframe mode. So F3 will turn on shaded mode, and F4 allows us to see the object in both shaded and wireframe. And what's good about this kind of angle, or this view, is that we can see how many resolution steps we have, or if you just want to think how many polygons, how much mesh density, whatever is going on. So I can look at this right here at 20, and I'll type 100 in, and we'll see how much more denser this becomes. And it's, you know, this is probably a little bit more dense than it needs to be. Each model that you make is going to call for a different setup. The biggest thing is, notice I didn't even see it change between 50 and 100, but it's 50% less than what it was. And there's 20, still didn't really see a difference. 10, okay, now I'm starting to see a difference. So, you know, we just have to ask yourself, what is the resolution you can get away with? And once you find that, and you can you know, go with that, work with that amount. And it's all dependent upon the strength of your computer, the needs of the maybe the company you're working for, or whatever. Just keep in mind that if we set this to 100 for this object here, when I create another one, this object now, it has 100 steps of resolution. So, you know, just be wary of that. And I can also come in here and in the create, set this up to be, you know, however you want. And when we create it, it'll be that way. 10 steps of resolution. So, things that are good to know. Obviously, these are 3 really important rollouts. Gives us a lot of control over things that we can do, and you definitely need to be aware of it and familiar with it. Same with F3 and F4, which is turning on the shaded wireframe versus just shaded, and F3, which is wireframe or shaded mode. So as you can tell, if no matter what object we create, if we created, let's say, a light, and we get out of create mode, and now we want to make adjustments to it, we go to the modifier stack, we can make adjustments to it. If we created a particle system, and we notice we hit play, and the particle system's actually running, and we go to move tool, and we get out of create mode, and we want to make adjustments to it, we go to modify. So whatever it is that you create, when you want to modify, edit, make adjustments to, you switch to the modify tab, and you can make those adjustments. Notice that if I have a sphere and I'm not selected on anything and I go to modify, there's going to be nothing in the list to look at. Click on it, and all the parameters pop into view for us. So it's another thing that's good to know. You know, create something, then we go and modify it. And just keep in mind as well that every time you create an object and you see maybe there's a new button to play with, don't think for a minute that you're going to explode the computer by clicking on a button, seeing what it does. Don't think for a minute that, playing around, experimenting with this object is going to be anything but a good thing. That's the only way you're going to get familiar with it, because I'm not going to take you through every single button, every single tool command and show you what they do. That is what your help, Autodesk 3D Max help, that's what this is for. This guides you through and shows you every single thing there is about this program. You'll have help tutorials. These are tutorials straight from Autodesk, the makers of Max. All kinds of different, you want to make some hair, you want to make cloth, special effects, everything that you could possibly want to know about Max, as far as the finite details about what this button does, what this parameter controls. All those things are in here. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and leave you for now. Those are, creating our geometry and our 2D shapes and some basic modifications that we can make to them. And the last thing that I want to talk about before I leave is the line. It's the only one that's the biggest difference. It's the most different object here. And our line basically can be created in many different ways. I can come back in and close it in on itself. But what I want to recommend to you when you make lines is that you do it. I'm going to hit F on my keyboard to go to my front view. And what I recommend when it comes to drawing lines is that you do it in your orthographic views, like front, top, or left. And what I want to show you is if I click left one time, notice I still have the settings set up. I'm going to right click to end the line. So I've now created my line. I can hit F3 to see what it looks like. If I go to modify, notice everything's still checked here and all of our settings are still the same. So I'm going to go to line and click, and we have a couple of options here. If I right now I'm just moving my mouse. If I left click once and move my mouse, see we get this really pointed edge here. And I come over here and just click again and move the mouse and click one more time, and now right click to end it. Okay, that is one way that we can make a spline or a line. The other way is if I click once, and then when I get to the next area, I'm going to click and hold the left mouse button down and move the mouse, and we see that we're actually adjusting the curve between this vertex we just made and the first vertex. We're actually adjusting that curve. And as soon as we release the left mouse button and move the mouse, we see we're actually now adjusting the curve between this vertex and wherever we're going to place this one. So I click over here, click and drag through it, and now we're adjusting the curve between these two vertices. So I'll find a nice curve, and when I let go, I now am coming down to find the next vertex point, which is here, and I'll click and drag to create the curve in between, and I will right click to end it, and there is a lot smoother version of this one. But knowing that we have this option, these are things that you've got to play with. And so obviously from here we can do all kinds of wonderful things. We can make really cool smiley faces. Come back in to where it starts and hit close. Custom shapes. We can actually, if we wanted to, come in here and pretend like we're writing something. So it's definitely things to play around with, and I just wanted to make sure that you knew that, knew where that was. And like I said, when you're first starting, obviously we can drag and create things right here in the perspective view. But I would just recommend when you're first starting that you would do it in the front view or the top view. Any of your orthographic views, any of these three, I would recommend be where you start if you're going to create custom lines and stuff like that. So I'm going to go ahead and leave you for now with this one, and I'll see you next time.